When it comes to dealing with insects, particularly mosquitoes, and especially while in the field, usually the best philosophy can be summed up as such.
The only good bug is a dead bug.
But oftentimes that can't be accomplished, and instead repellents are turned to, often coming in the form of mesh netting, special tents or bedding, helmet, hat, and head covers of all sorts, and of course insect sprays and liquid-based repellents. However, the United States at the end of the 1970s began fielding a rather interesting garment that in a way did all of that and more, and though its story, when it comes to official use, is pretty basic and somewhat uneventful. The lead up to its creation and life in the surplus market afterwards, though, are much more interesting. That piece, the Insect Repellent Jacket. Before getting into the swing of things, we first must take a moment to thank the sponsor of this video, Venture Surplus. If you're on the hunt for many US surplus pieces and related gear, Venture is a great starting point, as they stock things from the common, like combat uniforms of assorted branches, to the slightly less, like various navy-colored flight deck shirts, to the rare and obscure, such as radar scattering nets. So be sure to check them out, as they get new things in often. And while there, remember to use the coupon code HISTORY10 at checkout to get 10% off of your order. Thanks again, guys. Now on to the video. Over the course of the Second World War, some 16 million US service members were deployed across the globe. Of these, quite a few were sent to regions that were prone to mosquitoes and other insects, which alone are a nuisance, but when you add in the threat of diseases, particularly malaria, they become a legitimate problem. Regions and theaters like the Pacific, the CBI, or China, Burma, India, the Caribbean in support roles, and even regions of North Africa and Italy could see troops going up against the dangers of the mosquito-borne disease, and in many cases casualties from contracting it outnumbered those injured in combat. Though deaths from it were very low, some statistics say upwards of 60% of forces, in the case of the full Pacific Theater, contracted it at one point or another, with some locations such as Milne Bay in the territory of Papua, now Papua New Guinea, seeing a 4,000 cases per every 1,000 soldiers in the span of 1 year, meaning many contracted it multiple times. Obviously, equipment, gear, uniforms, and medicine were deployed and employed to try and mitigate this, but at the end of the day, it caused quite a problem, and naturally after the war, research and endeavors to improve the quality and efficiency of everything related to fighting insects, in case the US would have to once again send forces to malaria endemic areas of the world, continued. Things like changes to malaria medicine, from atabrine, which had the fun side effect of sometimes turning one's skin yellow, to chloroquine and primaquine, and later on mefloquine, saw the reduction of both negative side effects and relapse rates, at least until long-term effects were discovered, as was the case with mefloquine, but that's a whole different story. Anyway, on top of this, research into improving and or replacing insect repellents were also undertaken, and granted some like DDT were pretty detrimental, others such as dithiotoluamide, or more commonly DEET, or bug juice in the early 1960s and later on permethrin, proved far safer. That, along with improved training and methods for proper application, reapplication, and general protection, helped curb cases and problems. And speaking of the 1960s, this was when all of this came into play in a big way. As the Vietnam War began ramping up, and being a tropical region, it was rife with insects, which also included malaria-carrying mosquitoes. By this time, new and improved products, directives, and procedures began being employed, coming in the form of weekly malaria pills, the reinforcing of effective usage of repellent and personal insecticides, proper wearing of uniforms, i.e. having the sleeves of coats and tops rolled down while trousers were bloused, along with the addition of secondary items like helmet and hat netting to protect the head and face, the setting up of netting when sleeping, and unit field sanitation teams who were tasked with ensuring all of this was followed while also combating mosquitoes in regions forces may be positioned for prolonged periods. However, even with all of this, when it came to newer tangible items such as updated versions of helmet and hat netting, as well as the insect netting bar, all of which utilize small tight-knit mesh fabrics, little changed from a general standpoint when compared to the pieces of the decades prior. However, this wouldn't stay that way for long, as throughout the war, assorted experiments, field tests, and endeavors were conducted that assessed different weaves of mesh and netting, insecticides and repellents, and garments utilizing the two. Since 1965, the Naval Medical Field Research Laboratory had been experimenting and evaluating wide mesh netting that utilized spatial repellents rather than personal applied ones, or in other words, a larger mesh screen that saw bigger spaces between cross-sections that were impregnated with chemicals that repelled insects within a certain area around the material versus traditional personal liquid or spray repellents that simply kept the insects off the user. If effective, this change in the mesh sizing could allow for better airflow and a more efficient shield against insects. Using these concepts, an idea began to take shape: create a garment that could be worn over uniforms, allowing for extended protection against insects and mosquitoes that didn't require constant reapplication of repellents every few hours. Not long after, early tops began to be developed and tested that often looked like the one seen here. Appearing around 1971 and created by the U.S. Army Environmental Hygiene Agency, it was made of nylon and cotton mesh and appeared almost as a zip-up sweatshirt, seeing a hood, drawstrings, and a front pocket accessible via both sides. But between 1965 and 1975 or so, numerous versions of the jacket were developed and fielded, which were then run through all sorts of tests. These saw, but were not limited to, different fabric compositions, weights, net spacing, treatment methods and chemicals, various participation with organizations and governments, as even the Canadian Defense Research Establishment in Ottawa became involved, and locations, which range from the U.S. states of Alaska, California, and North Carolina to Canada and even Ethiopia. During all of this, the design was slowly refined and eventually finalized around 1975, proving to be a little better than anticipated in that it could repel more than just mosquitoes, was actually more durable than originally thought, could be effective anywhere between 2 weeks of full infantry combat usage all the way up to 1 full year of entrenched or fixed positional usage, granted this based on personal care, and could have the repellent be easily reapplied when needed. This final piece would be known as the Jacket Insect Repellent, though also later on, oddly in some documents, the Parka Fabric Mesh Insect Repellent. Formally entering the NATO stock system in 1977, the Insect Repellent Jacket was made in a 67-33 cotton polyester blend in the OG 107 color shade and had a snap button front closure, a hood with elastic adjusters meant to be worn over a hat or helmet, extended sleeves so one could easily retract their hands into that could then be snapped closed, and a short torso length section intended to end slightly above the waist, which too had elastic adjuster cords. They were all issued with a small container of insect repellent type 2A, aka DEET, along with a small resealable plastic bag and a basic one-page informational instructional guide. All one had to do was either fold the jacket up, pour the DEET on top and the sides, and simply reseal it and let sit for 24 hours, or simply hit it with some sprays of the aerosol version, leading them to be rated for up to 6 weeks of effectiveness if not placed back in the bag between uses. As it said on the guide, these were intended to be worn over uniforms, with the minimum being a lightweight undershirt, though best usage appeared to be over standard field utility or combat tops. They came in 3 sizes, small, medium, and large, and were rated to protect against various insects, but at the end of the day, it appears they were only as good as the repellent that were applied to them. Through the 1970s and 80s, these continued to be made via assorted contracts, however recorded instances of their usage seems to be limited, with the most seen example being Marines participating in Exercise Valiant Usher 88, held in the Philippines, as well as a handful of informational images to highlight them in medical and health documents and reports related to assorted locations, operations, units, and so on. Based on available contract figures through the 1980s and into the 1990s, with 91 being the final contract year, just over 94,000 of these were made in between the 3 sizes, which sounds like a lot, but when you compare it to other uniform pieces, it's really not. Saying that though, it's a safe assumption that these weren't fielded or issued all that much, likely only being saved for the most mosquito and insect-laden regions and operations, but even then, it's still hard to say with certainty how popular they were in an official military capacity. But even a failed or less than successful piece can have a second usage or life, and that is exactly what happened with these, as they became much more chic and sought after as a trendy fashion piece during the Y2K era and slightly beyond. As the late 1990s approached, the US military had changed quite a bit when it came to fighting and repelling insects and mosquitoes, with one of the biggest, at least when it came to garments and uniforms, being the process of impregnating assorted ones with permethrin, an insecticide that killed many insects shortly after contact as opposed to repelling them, which began in 1991. This essentially diminished the need for a second garment, as standard ones could simply be worn and were easier to manage, and even though they could lose their effectiveness over time and through washing, the permethrin could simply be reapplied. All of that, and pretty much the act of just using bug spray as an alternative, seemed to be the more common approach, more or less going back to using repellents rather than carrying around an additional piece of kit. Whatever the case though, quite a number of these jackets started to be surplus, hitting the market around the late 1990s and into the early 2000s. Fitting right into the aesthetic of the time, the jacket blended perfectly among the sea of looser and shorter casual styles for both women and men, as it appealed to women because of the mesh appearance, which had become rather popular, and short torso section akin to something like a halter top, while with men the baggier arms and almost sweatshirt-like look of it could be worn over other items or even on its own. To name a few notable examples of its usage that played into this appeal as a fashion piece, it appeared a few times on popular television shows such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer and its spin-off show Angel. It probably showed up on more shows, but I'm not going to subjugate myself to watching every potential one from the turn of the millennia to find out. Being picked up by the short-lived clothing company Clothes Horse and modeled during the 2003 LA Fashion Week by actor Aaron Paul, who would become very well known 5 years later after being cast as Jesse Pinkman in the TV show Breaking Bad, worn by Beyonce for the December 2006 issue of Elle magazine, and obviously becoming a piece sold both as a surplus item and as a garment one may wear for a night on the town, or to a rave, concert, or simply the beach. These continue to be used and seen as fashion pieces for years, even showing up as the Urban Renewal Vintage Mesh Hoodie being sold by Urban Outfitters. Today they are much rarer as the few original surplus stocks have dried up, but they still do appear being sold from time to time, though more often than not by vintage and trendy secondhand clothing sellers, usually for a good deal of money. As for its military use, it's slowly faded into obscurity, still being listed here and there as options for personnel at certain locations and for certain tasks or duties, along with other insect-resistant or repelling things like bed and head nets, but eventually it was canceled in 2004. What replaced it? Well, mostly tried-and-true bug spray and repellents, but also permethrin-treated uniforms, which were done on a case-by-case basis via the individual dynamic absorption kits that use the same garment in-bag with repellent concept as the Insect Jacket, but improved upon it. Additionally, certain garments began to also be made pre-treated, which were identified via secondary yellow tags before becoming much more common and universal around the 2010s. Oh, and technically, as in actually the technical replacement, the Jacket Bug Out, which entered the management system in 2001. This garment was made commercially by the brand Bug Out, being ordered on demand with just under 1,000 being procured since it gained a stock number, likely used for more specialty purposes and tasks. This new jacket pretty much took a much smaller netting you'd find on a bed net and made it into a quarter-zip sweatshirt, seeing longer, wider sleeves with elastic cuffs, a nylon drawstring and larger hood intended to be worn over headwear while also completely covering the wearer's face, a longer torso section that also included an adjustable drawstring, and even a standard two-arm pocket as seen on actual sweatshirts. So, summing it up, these garments went from to. But with that, we've pretty much covered this rather bizarre but interesting piece of US militaria that may have flown under the radar of those in the surplus realm, but made a decently large splash in the fashion world. Thanks again to Venture Surplus for sponsoring this one, and hopefully this quick video was entertaining and enjoyable. And if you thought so, perhaps leave a like and click the subscribe button if you haven't yet already. If not, that's no problem, just be sure to make a beeline, get it, bug puns, back here soon for more of the history of right here on Uniform History.